All right, boys and girls, I'm going to continue reading our story, and it is a story by Roald Dahl, and the name of the story is Fantastic Mr. Fox. We know that this is a fantasy because in our story we can see that the fox has clothes on. Also, throughout the story, the fox is talking. So we know that we have chapter 5, which is the terrible tractors. We have Mr. Fox and his wife and their 4 children. And Mr. Fox would typically go to the farmers that live around him and get food for his family from them. But he was stealing from them and they really didn't like that, so that they are trying to stop him from doing that. So first they tried to shoot him as he was coming out of his hole, and that didn't work. But they ended up shooting off his tail. And then they tried to dig him out, and that didn't work because Mr. Fox and his family started digging downwards because they felt foxes will dig much faster than people, even when they're using big machines to do that. And so now that we have the chapter, the terrible tractors. So you are thinking and predicting, what are they going to do with these tractors? So let's find out. As the sun rose the next morning, Bogus and Bounce and Bean were still digging. They had dug a hole so deep you could have put a house into it, but they had not yet come to the end of the fox's tunnel. They were all very tired and cross. So if somebody is cross, what do you think that might mean? They're tired and they're like upset or not happy. Would be cross. Dang and blast, said Bogus. Whose rotten idea was this? Bean's idea, said Bunce. Bogus and Bunce both stared at Bean. Bean took another swig of cider, then put the flask back into his pocket without offering it to the others. Listen, he said angrily, I want that fox. I'm going to get that fox. I'm not giving in till I've strung him up over my front porch dead as a dumpling. We can't get him by digging, that's for sure, said the fat Bogus. I've had enough of digging. Bunce and the little pot-bellied dwarf looked up at Bean and said, Have you got any more stupid ideas then? What, said Bean? I can't hear you. Bean never took a bath. He never even washed. As a result, his ear holes were clogged with all kinds of muck and wax and bits of chewing gum and dead flies and stuff like that. Ooh. This made him deaf. Speak louder, he said to Bunce, and Bunce shouted back, Got any more stupid ideas? Bean rubbed the back of his neck with a dirty finger. He had a boil coming there, and it itched. What we need on this job, he said, is machines, mechanical machines. We'll have him out in 5 minutes with mechanical shovels. This was a pretty good idea, and the other 2 had to admit it. All right, then, Bean said, taking charge. Bogus, you stay here and see the fox doesn't escape. Bunce and I will go and fetch our machinery. If he tries to get out, shoot him quick. The long, thin Bean walked away. The tiny Bunce trotted after him. The fat Bogus stayed where he was with his gun pointing at the fox hole. Soon, 2 enormous caterpillar tractors with mechanical shovels on their front ends came clanking into the woods. Bean was driving one, Bunce the other. So this is a picture of him like messing with his ear. That's gross. Disgusting. The machines were both black. They were murderous, brutal-looking monsters. Here we go, then, shouted Bean. Death to the fox, shouted Bunce. The machines went to work biting huge mouthfuls of soil out of the hill. The big tree under which Mr. Fox had dug his hole in the first place was toppled like a matchstick. On all sides, rocks were sent flying and trees were falling, and the noise was deafening. That means it's super, super loud. Down in the tunnel, the foxes crouched, listening to the terrible clanging and banging overhead. What's happening, Dad? Cried the small foxes. What are they doing? Mr. Fox didn't know what was happening or what they were doing. "It's an earthquake," cried Mrs. Fox. "Look," said one of the small foxes, "our tunnel's getting shorter. I can see daylight." They all looked round, and yes, the mouth of the tunnel was only a few feet away from them now. And in the circle of daylight beyond, they could see the two huge black tractors almost on top of them. "Tractors," shouted Mr. Fox, "and mechanical shovels. Dig for your lives. Dig, dig, dig." And so this shows you what it's looking like. Chapter 6, the race. So what would that mean? Predict what you think this chapter is about then. The race. What do you think? All right, so let's see if you're right, okay? Now there began a desperate race. The machines against the foxes. In the beginning, the hill looked like this. So I'm going to turn it like that. Look like that. Can you see where they are? Okay. After about an hour on the machine, as the machines bit away more and more soil from the hilltop, it looked like this. So it went from looking like that to looking like that. Sometimes the foxes would gain a little ground and the clanking noises would grow fainter. That means they couldn't hear it as well. And Mr. Fox would say, "We're going to make it. I'm sure we are." But then a few moments later, the machines would come back at them and the crunch of the mighty shovels would get louder and louder. Once the foxes actually saw the sharp metal edge of one of the shovels as it scraped up the earth just behind them. "Keep going, my darlings," panted Mr. Fox. "Don't give up." "Keep going," the fat bogus shouted to Bunce and Bean. "We'll get him any moment now." "Have you caught sight of him yet?" Bean called back. "Not yet," shouted Bogus, "but I think we're close." "I'll pick him up with my bucket," shouted Bunce. "I'll chop him to pieces." But by lunchtime, the machines were still at it, and so were the poor foxes. The hill now looked like this. I guess I should. Wrong side. Sorry. That's what it looks like now. Okay. The farmers didn't stop for lunch. They were too keen to finish their job. It means they really wanted to finish their job. "Hey there, Mr. Fox," yelled Bunce, leaning out of his tractor. "We're coming to get you now." "You've had your last chicken," yelled Bogus. "You'll never come prowling around my farm again." A sort of madness had taken hold of the three men, and the tall, skinny Bean and the dwarfish, pot-bellied Bunce were driving their machines like maniacs, racing the motors and making the shovels dig at a terrific speed. The fat Bogus was hopping about like a dervish and shouting, "Faster, faster." By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this is what had happened to the hill. So now it looks like that. The hole the machines had dug was like the crater of a volcano. It was such an extraordinary sight that crowds of people came rushing out from the surrounding villages to have a look. They stood on the edge of the crater and stared down at Bogus and Bunce and Bean. "Hey there, Bogus, what's going on?" "We're after a fox." "You must be mad." That means crazy. The people jeered and laughed, but this only made the three farmers more furious, so they're mad, and more obstinate, they're determined, and they're not going to give up, and more determined than ever not to give up until they had caught the fox. Okay, so here they are. So the next chapter is chapter 7, and we'll never let him go. So the chapter, we'll find out what happens and if they are able to get Mr. Fox.